Okay, we're live. Hello and welcome to Dive into World Building. Today's topic is naming characters, and I have lots of friends here with me. It always ends up that we're starting around 11:10 or 11:11, and I think just basically this is the issue of trying to get enough people in so that we can have the discussion. I'm afraid that's just kind of how it works out, but whatever. We're here. We're going. We're going to do this thing. Um, hmm. Here's my friend Alexandra asking me questions. But let's talk about naming characters. Um, so let's start with. Sometimes what I find is that characters name themselves.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
And when characters name themselves, really what's going on there is we're naming them based on our subconscious instincts, right? But you can see people. There's Alexandra. You can see people actually, depending on what book you're reading, you can see characters that have been named very deliberately, and you can see ones that you think might have been named deliberately, but who knows whether the author's just going on their gut, right? But when we go on our gut, what are we really working with? Any sense?
Well, when you go with your gut, I mean, you usually have something of the character in your head.
Right.
Right. And I think when you're naming a character, you're trying to character is.
Right.
So if you've already got the character in your head, yeah, then ideally the name will reflect that somehow. Whether it's, I mean, the more obvious examples are character names like Cain, or I mean, or Thor, or you do tend to run into characters that have a name that comes with a lot of baggage already.
And actually, I'm going to use a fancy word for you. It's called intertextuality.
Ooh, good one.
Yeah.
You don't hear that very often.
Yeah.
Nice.
And basically, with a word like Cain, or a name like Cain, or a name like Thor, what we're doing is we're actually evoking the text in which that name originally appeared.
Right.
And that's what intertextuality means. So that intertextuality is definitely a big factor. Any other thoughts on sources of possible baggage for names? Onomatopoeia is one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So onomatopoeia is actually something that has a lot of international, interlinguistic significance. You tend to find cross-linguistically that things that have ee and ticka 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 sounds in them are for small, cute things, and like Pikachu, like.
Don't ever do that again, please.
When you have something that sounds big and round and blah and bong bong blah bong bong, you tend to think of things that are larger, and that actually does get reflected in names and in namings. The other one is etymology. So vowel and consonant qualities are the onomatopoeia. And etymology is things like Voldemort.
Yeah.
where Volda means wanting and Mort means death. Well, can we be a little more straightforward? Oh, I don't know. I think it sounds great to me. Right? I mean, why not? He's Voldemort. He's perfect.
bad
Just the
guy,
way he
isn't it?
is. Because he wants death, and that's it, man. And we know that from maybe nobody wants to say their name because they don't want death, right? It's all there. So those are some of the things that can be that can be entering in to our gut naming issues. Okay, so also the other thing that we can have coming into it is our experience with people. If you've met a lot of Susies who have particular characteristics, you're going to tend to name another character Susie if they have that characteristic, right? Or you hear people say, well, "I would never name my child whatever that is," right? Oh, I would never name my child Lucy because I've been dissed by too many Lucys in my life, you know. So all kinds of things can enter into our gut decisions. The other thing, okay, so here's another thing. Not even etymology, but similarity to actual words.
Or just actual words.
That's true.
So
I know someone named Summer Dawn.
Oh, that's lovely.
I had some friends whose names were Lunora and Sonora.
What were their parents taking at
their,
the time?
and their brother's name was Orion, and their other sister's name was Prairie Sky. It was the 70s.
Oh.
Yes.
One of my school friends, when I was much younger, she and her sister, their names are actually taken from a Scrabble board.
Awesome.
Yeah, they're both kind of insert name May, but it's just like random jubbling kind of mix of letters, and it's just this weird thing of, so your parents named you after a Scrabble board. Right.
Yeah, totally, man.
Their own privacy. I won't tell you what the names are, but they were inventive.
Well, and then there's a question which we can get into later of ethnicity associations with names. And depending on the kind of world you're working in, you're either going to want to lean more on these different factors. We've got a list of great different factors. So here's the list. Intertextuality, onomatopoeia, etymology, experience with people, similarity to actual words, and ethnic associations. I'm sure there's more, but that's like 6 different factors that we can bring in, which is just a lot. And also another one, gender, because gender is always relevant. I used to go crazy when I would read a book and every woman's name ended in A.
Yeah.
Like, oh, come on, don't give me yet another person whose name ends in A who's female. No, don't do this to me.
God, that sounds like something I do on my life.
We've all done it at one time or another.
Watch that, yeah.
It is the kind of the standard thing of this character's male, this character's female. That's the line.
Well, you know, there's actually a current trend in American names that boys' names are overwhelmingly ending in N right now. And I find myself, I find myself naming boys in stories with names that end in N. So let's, I'll talk a little bit about, let's get into this gender question a little bit. I have read some books where all the girls' names end in A, and then the boys' names tend to be, I don't know, a little bit more diverse, which tends to reflect certain kinds of trends. But I have also read books where there's supposed to be no gender significance, and I'm trying to think of the name of the book, but it's not coming to me, and it doesn't really matter. But the author made such an effort to make everybody's names a little bit less gendered, and so it was definitely very hard to tell how and or when to differentiate the characters by gender. So, in a way, at least in my world, when I'm working with Varan, I don't want to have all my women's names end in A. A lot of my male characters' names actually end in A. Like Cinta and Maruvia are both male, right?
Was that like an on-purpose reaction to that other book you read?
It was actually a deliberate strategy, and I mean it's not that all the men's names end in A either, but there just are some that end in A. But there are some
thinking
gender
about the
trends, like
left
so,
hand
for
of
example,
darkness.
women will have names ending in IS.
Hmm.
What were you saying, Jess? Jessica, can you say that again?
She was saying about the left hand of darkness, so I'm guessing we're going to get onto Le Guin territory.
Uh-huh, absolutely. So I have some gender trend reversal, but I do have gender trends, but they're not uniform. One of the themes of the whole Varan world is that it's not uniform. Hey, Brian, I can't hear you. You appear to be muted, and you're going to have to unmute yourself if you want to come into the conversation, because I don't think I'm in charge of that.
Oh, okay.
Goofy laugh. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, I think we lost Jessica for a second there. Okay, that would explain why I wasn't hearing her.
Sorry, I'm back. I was thinking about the names used in Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness.
Yeah.
Where you have shifting gender.
Yes.
And I know when I actually read that book for the first time, like I think not only the concept of a species where gender shifts, but I actually had trouble associating names with people because everybody was so kind of like there weren't a lot of like distinguishing characteristics besides like certain personality traits.
Yeah. Yeah, are you talking about physical ones or
yeah,
ones or
yeah, well they're definitely like, because physically they're all very very similar and like as neutral as their gender, that it's not until you get like midway through the story where there's established distinctive personalities that I remember even having trouble just with the naming conventions there, because I was just trying to keep the characters straight. And I love that book, but it was
me
kind
too.
of a
I
challenge
totally.
at the
But I see
beginning.
what you're saying. I think one of the issues is that when we're trying to convey gender neutrality, we may inadvertently reduce, and I'm not casting aspersions on Ursula Le Guin by any stretch, but it's hard to tease out because everything about what we do is so gendered. It's hard to tease out what characteristics we could give to characters that would make them distinct without making them seem more masculine or more feminine, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a lizard brain thing. Like, that's one of the things that you just unconsciously are trying to flag
Yeah.
out what gender something is, so you can figure out how it relates to you and your surroundings.
Yeah. No, I see that. I see the point. Does anybody have an example from their work that they would like to talk about? Like if there was a process for naming a particular character or something that any of you would like to share?
Well, I guess I'll go first because it's going to be brief. It's like most of the time I just kind of go with my gut for naming characters,
Mm-hmm.
and I do use the name as a way to sort of anchor myself to the character so that I can define them, and then but I don't really put a lot of thought into it before I get to the page. Now there is an exception to that, and I did write a YA about dragons, shaping dragons. And with that, I did try to choose names that had meaning, and because in the world, it's the shape-shifting dragons have a secondary, like they have like a secondary form of magic, and I wanted the names to reflect that magic without being too heavy-handed. So I did a search. Sorry, she's being really loud. But I did a search to you know, for names that meant certain things. Like I have, there's one character named Kyoko because she's a mirror dragon. If you ask her a question, like a silent video almost will play out on her scales when she's in her dragon form to answer that question. So that would be one example for my own work, but it's not something I often do. But then again, I'm working with I work across different genres also.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. How about you, Brian?
Actually, it's something I'm working on for. I'm doing a bunch of world building, and part of the one of the cultures. There's a key portion of the story has to do with a coming of age, and I determined that what I wanted to do was have their name be a part of that, so that they have a shorter name when they're young, and then once they've reached their coming of age, then they get the rest of their name. So the honorific for like the main character, he starts off before that age, and he starts SIM, Sim.
Mm-hmm.
But once he passes, he'll become Simon. So I determined that males will get an ON, maybe females will get an EL or something along those lines. And then I determined that there's another naming point where as becoming a leader of the community, you get another honorific, like TOR. So if Simon was to become the leader of his clan, he'd become Simon Tor.
Mm-hmm.
And just this idea of adding names to become part of your identity seemed like an interesting idea to me to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Like
And that's great because that's that's like McCaffrey in reverse, says Alexandra. Yes, absolutely. And also it's making use of morphology, which is a really, really great thing. Adding endings that have meaning is great. And I'm going to mention something else, but first I'm going to let Che go.
I have to say, getting to like the ethnic and ethnicity names, for some reason I end up with an inordinate amount of them. And I am constantly hitting Google for looking up names, and sort of horrifyingly enough, in Carmine Rojas' Dogfight, there is not a single white person. So I hit up
that is
Google
horrifying.
pretty hard for that one.
Are you saying horrifying in as much as you had to do lots and lots of research to name everybody?
No, I am afraid I did it all wrong, but nobody's reading the book, so it doesn't really matter.
Aww.
It's wrong.
They will read the book.
Because plain little white girl person and wrote like there's a Naga named Sejal Johar, and it sucked trying to find like Indian India from the continent names. And
So what you're saying is that you were actually looking up on the internet to get names that were sourced from actual languages.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. And then there was a Navajo skinwalker she was another really hard one to find.
Mm-hmm.
And and I ended up with Ulji Natsewe. I have no idea if I'm saying that even right. Um, uh,
But it doesn't matter because
and
I read your book and it was really good. I read it
oh,
in less than 2 sittings and in less than 24 hours. So
okay,
Nice.
that's her last name, not Natsewe. Um, and there were not a lot of resources,
Hmm.
and I don't know any Navajo people, and being lazy, I guess I really didn't try to find any. Um, so-
Yeah, well, that is a challenge, and it's a question of how far in deeply do you want to go into the research process, and it just, I guess,
yeah.
depends on, um, you know, how much culture and language and all that you're going to be putting into the story.
Yeah,
Um,
which actually not much. It's pretty shallow. I call it the Michael Bay of novellas because it really is just action sequences, shoot 'em up. It is. It's a really shallow shoot 'em up.
Yeah, but Michael Bay, that's like a death wish. Don't ever call it work that.
no, no,
No,
don't
man,
talk
Michael
yourself
Bay
down,
makes his
Ted.
money.
Don't talk yourself down.
Um, if I had Michael Bay's money, I would write shallow for the rest of my life, man.
If we had
So it would pay me millions to do that.
We're talking about a job in this movie.
So
Ugh.
Alexandra is noting that the U.S. government can give you information on how to contact First Nations on this kind of thing. That
Okay.
sounds awesome, and it is definitely worthwhile to
Um,
for my story Mind Locker that was in analog. I guess that was back in, oh gosh, March or something. Anyway, I'm getting confused here, but so oh no, it was in May that it came out. Um, I wanted to have a name that was partly from Ghana and partly from India, and then because for my main name that was her dad's name, and he was a Sikh, so I needed to go and research, and I also, because I am me, I wanted to have it have some kind of global significance of some variety, so so that it wouldn't be something like the word for sheep without me realizing it. I mean, so research on this stuff is definitely very, very important and valuable. I also wanted to mention that Tolkien, when he names characters, at least his elf characters, are named with literal meanings from the elf languages.
Good God.
So things like Galadriel actually have a specific meaning within that linguistic context.
Yeah, but he's the antithesis of Michael Bay. If Michael Bay just did pow, 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 Tolkien does the whole kind of like, here's another reality, even a couple of centuries.
And you know what? If you have a conlang that you're working with, then working within that is actually pretty valuable. I mean, as far as naming conventions are concerned. But I mean, the names that we have in our world are so far divorced from their original linguistic contexts that it's hard to say. We have books to tell us what they mean, right?
Yeah,
And perhaps at one point they meant something literally. Some of them do, like shoemaker as a last name, or but we don't typically have a lot of that. The other thing that thinking in language terms can help you with is it can give you a lot of hints about the history of your world. Because, for example, the foreign world is one continent, and with basically two religions uniform in its I don't know, ethnic makeup, but even though its people are very, very genetically mixed together in this small-ish, I mean, it's a continent. I mean, how small is that? But they're pretty genetically mixed in this environment. there are nonetheless 3 or 4 different language groups that the names come out of. And I'm hoping that I can take advantage of that to kind of say, ooh, I got little secrets to tell you later about where all these people originally came from. But, you know, so often people will say, well, if you're going to have names, you know, make sure that they come out of the same phonological tradition where they're not, you know, so they're not, you know, my husband always says that, you know, when you're naming children, you know, don't name your children Ewan and Helga. Because siblings Ewan and Helga, one of them coming out of Celtic languages and the other one coming out of Germanic languages, is just going to be too bizarre, right? And I see his point, but at the same time, making uniformity within a social context is actually a very meaningful thing.
Yeah.
And so lack of uniformity is actually more natural. And at a certain point, I mean, because when I first started creating yarn, it was your names up, and they all had accents on them, and it was like, oh my gosh, you know, I was a teenager. What can I say? But at a certain point, I was like, I need to figure out what's going on here with these names. And a lot of the ones that I was actually most attached to felt like they came from different languages, and that was the original reason why I decided that but it actually helped me construct the world through the naming process by saying to myself, well, if they do come from different language groups, what language groups might they be coming from? And that really helped me to flesh out the world's history as I was coming up with stuff, you know.
Well, yeah, that gives it a lot of deep context.
Mm-hmm. Any more examples from the crew?
I do mine alliteratively usually. So I backtrack. I come up with, because I tend to work with ensemble casts. I usually have multiple characters that interact fairly regularly. Mm-hmm. And so I tend to make their names sayable together. I tend to try and work their names. So if you're going to list off everybody's name, or if you're going to have a catchphrase that covers a pair of characters or a set of characters, I have one pair of characters that are almost always in the same scene together at the same time together, mm-hmm. and their names are Brighton and Rice. Okay. Which, you know, I tend to say them out loud, and I tend to run through several different iterations, and then I backtrack to make sure that I haven't given them any baggage. So I usually come up with the good sounding, or a set of names that flow well first, you know, mm-hmm. that flow off the tongue, and then I'll go back and start, you know, making sure that I, you know, didn't call anybody butthead in, you know, Southeast Indian or something.
I have a friend named Beavis.
See, there you go.
Oh my God.
Their cultural baggage.
Yeah. So, and I think that you have a point with the whole question of flowing well, because, I mean, like, when I named my kids, I wanted to make sure that the names flowed well. And a lot of what you have when you're naming characters or children or whatever it is the meter, the stress, and where it falls in the different names that they have. And whether it will go well together is partly a function of metrical qualities as well as that kind of thing. Apostrophes, yeah, apostrophes. We should talk about them just so that we don't really have to talk about them. I mean, I think if there's a reason why you have your apostrophes, like in McCaffrey, there's a reason why those apostrophes are there. It's a very specific name-changing thing that you do, right? And it gives rise to this apostrophe. Great, awesome. Just don't put them everywhere. They're not grace notes.
I've done it once, and I've only done it once, once, because genuinely, my main character's name is like 4 syllables long otherwise, and it's the only way that, no one ever uses her given name. It's always the contraction version, and yet her given name is still as important, so, she has an apostrophe in the middle. And I'm really hoping it's not going to mess people up when they go, what the hell is that doing in the middle of someone's name?
Not if they
You do what you need to do.
Oh, God.
Well, if you I don't know if you guys have ever listened to Tom Lehrer. He had this joke about a fellow who he knew whose name was Henry, and it was spelled Hen3RY.
Oh yes.
Do you remember that? And the three
was silent.
It's nice to have reasoning behind the things that you do, so they don't just seem pointless. And because a lot of our instinct to put those features on names is a lot of our instinct to put those kind of features on names is to make them seem special with decoration.
It's
probably
fashion for text.
I think it works in poetry, but I don't know that works in a narrative. I think in a narrative work, that like visual thing that people like to play with, I think it's distracting. I think it can pull you out of the story, and that's the last thing you want a reader to experience.
Right.
But in poetry,
well, poetry has
a
visual aspect. I think the real key is doing things deliberately rather than doing things accidentally. Making sure that you have a reasoning behind what you're doing. And you know what? There may be people out there who don't care about your reasoning, and they're just going to be like, waste of my time, forget it, right?
Yeah.
But if it makes sense to you, it's more likely to be acceptable to somebody else.
As I say, look, if Star Trek can get away with putting an apostrophe on every single nearly alien name ever, because it makes it look more alien rather than being a genuine contraction of a longer name, I can do it just once, and get away with it.
Yeah, I didn't want to put any accents. Like when I revised my book, I didn't want to put any accents on anybody's name, and then I realized that I was going to really have a problem with people calling my character, whose name was Katin, they were going to call her Katin, and that bugged the heck out of me. Now, this is another question. Do you care about how readers read your names aloud? Well, in some cases I do, like in the Katin case, because I don't want her to sound like Satin or Kitten.
That's just too cute.
It doesn't make any sense to me. So I decided, okay, fine, I'm going to break down and put an accent on the I. So her name looks like this, for those of you who are in the chat bar. Katin.
See, that's
Or
the thing. I
don't care. If you say Katin, it's fine with me. If you say Katin, I don't care. I'm pretty relaxed generally about how people pronounce the names that I write down, honestly.
I think the problem with
every so often there will be one, and I'll be like, no, I can't have people say, And I think it's partly the question of subconscious associations and baggage that makes me feel that way.
Sorry, cat.
That's all right.
It's just like
a little bit of meowing always adds to the atmosphere.
Yeah, he's not happy at the moment, so he's just meowing. I think the problem with accents, unless you grew up speaking a European language or had exposure to it, I look at accents and I don't know how to pronounce them, and I sit there going, oh God, how do I put an umlaut on the top of something? Where's my keyboard? Oh God, I just sit there going, I'm going to spend the entire book writing.
Well, it's funny because I had this is when I heard the podcast, I was like, oh, it that way. Okay, all right. It was really kind of fun and odd to listen to somebody else taking my Vara names and interpreting them. And some of them they changed over the course of the podcast, so that the more times she said them, the more they sounded like what I wanted them to sound like, which is nice, because at least it means that I'm kind of aware of how they would be said in casual conversation. You know.
I didn't realize how much I cared about pronunciation until I and cared about naming my characters so that they were easily pronounceable and you couldn't do it any other way, until I listened to like a couple audiobooks where something that I knew the correct pronunciation and it was butchered. There's a Mexican fable of
we lost you there.
Llorona, and I listened to Llorona, and I seriously had to turn it off because it was making it, like I find language fascinating. I have like a rudimentary knowledge of like German, Spanish, and French, so enough that I'm like I was just like, oh my god, no, like no, I can't listen to this. But I think the most recent and most egregious one I just heard was because I don't want to actually sit down and read it, but it's interesting. All of the Third Reich, and beautiful narration, and they pronounce the name Alois. It's Alois, and it's been pronounced like either Alois or Alice or so, it's like it's so awful, and I'm like, oh, you had and you got paid to do this.
Yeah, like you had one job. No, I mean
exactly.
Hard, actually.
But I'm like, no, don't do it.
Because if you're a voice actor, what do you do, right? I mean, so I was in a situation a little bit like that when I had in March when I had my Japanese story come out on the Clark's World podcast, and I suddenly had this epiphany. Oh my gosh, it's going to be in a podcast. It's full of Japanese words. What the heck? Poor Kate. You know, like, how can I do this to her? So I actually went on Google Plus, and I made a video of myself pronouncing all the Japanese words from the story.
Yeah.
And that was the most brilliant idea ever.
And it's the only thing I could think of.
I think a lot of people do that now. I mean, I've been, because I listen to lots of audiobooks being, you know, visually impaired and shit. I do tend to pay a lot more attention to how the narrators actually bother to pronounce words. I mean, to give you an example, I've just finished listening to the latest October Day book by Sean Ann Maguire, which is kind of urban fantasy, but there's lots of Irish in there. You know, Mary Robinette Coel, who does the pronunciation, she's really, really, really good at narrating. She's excellent. But whose name's my cat? It got to the point where one thing broke my kind of submersion in the latest book, Chimes at Midnight. Oh wait, sorry, The Winter Long. The entire series, she's been pronouncing the word now as in like it's fairy mound. It's pronounced as in Knowe. She's suddenly stopped pronouncing it as now and started pronouncing it as no. And it was just like, wait a second, what? No, it's been a completely different word for the entire like last 8-9 books.
Well, that's tricky,
Why
right?
now? Yeah, I am picky though. I'm allowed to be picky because that's my main.
Well,
need.
I mean, you're talking over a series, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm. This is what happens when you give you know, an Aspergic blind girl unlimited audio credits. You know, I the first time she mispronounced Kitsune, I kind of went, no, God, no. It's not silent.
Wait, what was she?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting, and it's valuable to think about it from more than one perspective. I think maintaining the consistency of one's interpretation of names over the course of a long piece, like a series like Game of Thrones, would be very, very difficult, especially if you're not hearing them that often. Because as the actor, how do you hold on to the fact, you know, in your memory that you pronounced this particular way 2 books ago if you haven't seen it since then?
Like gibberish, especially if you're.
I mean, I can't blame you for going, but at the same time, it's like, how much forgiveness should we expect to have, and probably quite a bit for the voice actors.
You need the audio equivalent of a style sheet.
Yeah. It did actually make me go and pick up one of the print editions just to have a look at the pronunciation guide, and it actually inspired me because of my recent novel coming out. I actually sat down and wrote a very, very long pronunciation guide for all the names because it makes me cringe when people pronounce something.
And if it makes you cringe,
here in my head.
Well, I'm
Totally.
always grateful for pronunciation guides. There are so many books I've read where there's nothing and you're just guessing.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know what is this word,
Well, and then there are the names that are so long that you have no hope of pronouncing them out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
It
like
tends to
something,
be a lot of stuff with like Gaelic or sort of older mythological words where
like
Aztec.
silent.
Like anything like Gaelic or Welsh, you're like, oh my god, can I have a vowel, please?
Yeah.
Yes.
What?
Oh god, yes. It's like that's not silent. What's it doing there then?
How are two D's and a W making a vowel? I don't understand this.
Right. That is a place when having a pronunciation guide would be very, very helpful.
Yeah. And so many people just don't do it. And I mean, even for things like names from other countries, like I don't know what those two dots over a U do.
Umlaut.
Yeah, okay, I don't know what an umlaut does.
Nobody does.
Usually it changes vowel quality.
Well, I know it's supposed to do something. I just don't know what the end resulting noise.
Yeah, I understand.
I'm convinced half of the authors just go, oh, my keyboard does that. I'm going to put that in that name for the whole lot just to piss people off.
Wow. So Jamie is providing us with some info that I'm going to read out loud in case, because I don't think people who watch the video get that far. At the bigger audio houses, they have people who basically do nothing but look up pronunciations and prepare marked up versions of the text to make it easier for the narrator to read when the tape is rolling.
Yeah, see, that's pretty awesome.
But I mean, great. I'm glad they have that, right?
Yeah.
A couple more things I wanted to mention. One is a really silly thing. You don't want your names to be
yes.
Especially since a lot of people read by looking at the first and last letter and sort of glossing over everything in between. So having two names that start with the same letter can be a problem. I was writing through, a story, and I had these characters whose names began with M, and that all was well until they all ended up in the same room.
Oh.
And then I was like, now what? So I've got Midas and Moretta and Mela in the same room. This is not okay.
I actually try to never duplicate starting consonants for any of my names. In any of the pieces I've done, I always try to make sure that every name starts with a different letter, because otherwise, and part of this is because my kids are learning how to read, and I see this error happening constantly where if it begins with an M, it must be this name.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
And it gets tricky after a while.
Yeah.
I absolutely must use the same starting letter. I'll try to go one syllable versus three syllables.
Yeah, I've just done that. I've got two characters starting letter and ending letter, and they're sleeping together, and it's just like, oh crap.
Well, and I had two names, and I just had to change one of them because one of them was Innes, and the other one was Yanis.
Yeah.
And they just were too similar.
Yeah.
So I changed Yanis to Yanir, even though it was sort of supposed to be what do you call it? A Tuckerization.
Yeah.
So it's no longer the Tuckerization that it used to be, but that's okay. But I do like the name Innes, and I have it working in other locations, and so I wanted to keep that one. But so Yanis ends up becoming Yanir. Have you ever had to change a name like that in the middle of your process?
Yes, and it really messes me up. Seriously, I had to do it. I had too many K's, and I was just getting really annoyed. And the bad guy, his name didn't sound evilish enough. And it's the whole thing of the problem for me is my characters tend to name themselves, so I don't really get a process part of the thing. And it is just like it's bad enough going through with search and replace to try and pick out all the names and replace them, but they still don't feel. It just feels wrong. It's like taking your firstborn child and renaming it Melody from Arthur at age 5.
So I'll give you an example of a time that I had to do that. I had to rename my main character for Love for Power, and it was really frustrating because his name is Taggart. Okay. And the problem is that people were looking at his name and reading his name as Target.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So because people see the word Target all the time because there's Target the store and whatever. Yeah, Jamie, you were one of the ones who was reading him.
Yeah,
as
I did
Target.
that too.
And
No, it's Target.
even though he kind of is a target, that's really not appropriate. His name cannot be Target. So I went through this long process of trying to change his name without actually changing his name. Okay? And I tried going, okay, well, what if we put 2 G's? Taggart. But then he looked more aggressive than he actually is as a character because they had a piece of the word aggressive in his name. Right?
My brain is detective when I hear Taggart as well, which doesn't help. That may just be a British thing.
So the and then of course was, well, what if we double the R? Then it would be Taggart. And that was just not okay.
But then you can get that lovely Spanish rolled R in there. Target.
What am I going to do?
You just sit really trying to do that.
And then I was really, really lucky because I had an online interaction with a friend by the name of Margaret.
Ah.
And I said, that's it. And I respelled his name T-A-G-A-R-E-T.
Margaret.
And that way it's still Taggart. And if people call him Taggart, I don't care.
In Taggart, it's unusual enough where most people will pause and say, maybe I've pronounced that a little bit incorrectly. Right? You've sort of got a self-correcting name there.
Yeah.
Without it being too far off the...
But because it was my main quest, his name was Taggart. I mean, way back in the beginning, his name was Taglet with an L, and it sounded like Piglet, and I was like, no, this is really not working. But ever
I'm
since
thinking Aglet.
Taggart, I've really been happy with it, and I was like, no, I'm not changing his name again because of this visual parsing error, which is really all it was.
Yeah.
And the A nicely disambiguates things, but that was an unusual, I guess, special case of,
Yeah.
Are there criteria to determine when it is or isn't worth changing the character's name? That's Brian's question. My sense of that is if you just have that character identified really strongly in your head as one thing, and they've kind of grown together, personality and name, then it's going to be really hard to change. Do you guys nickname your characters? Have people nickname your characters?
Oh God,
Obviously
yeah.
one of you do.
No, I hate nicknames.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody ever gets nicknamed in your books.
Not normally, no. It's like, okay, urban fantasy to me is like sort of the worst of the worst, like guilty of this crime, which is you give your character some kind of wacky, awesome name, and then you give them some nickname. Well, why did you give them the wacky name to begin with, only to give them a freaking nickname?
It's more like the mark
Usually
of the
there's some kind
hero.
of gender play in the nickname, too.
It makes people special and marks them out as being, the important protagonist.
Well, it's like, okay, so Brian's giving us the example of Melchizedek going by Mel.
Oh, good one.
And then there's one of Gisdazel Wichelom going by Ohm.
I really prefer
And you're like, okay, what was the point of all of that?
I do the last name thing.
But I do have examples of people who go by nicknames, but it's for a reason. I mean, so I have a character named Corbinin, and he thinks of himself as Corbinin, but he goes by Cor among his casual friends. Reggie says nicknames can tell you something about the character's community. Okay. And also the identity of the character as well. I have my character Nicantor. His name is Nicantor, but people who are close to him call him Neck, which makes him seem a little bit more vulnerable.
I think it killed the mystery of the name, personally. It's just like, Tor would have been a bit more kind of like, ooh, Nick is just...
But you see, that's the point, Leslie, is that everybody thinks of him as Nicantor except for those close to him, and those close to him are the only ones who are able to see those aspects of him that are not the ooh aspects. You see my point? So it's, I think, valuable for him to go by Neck with a few people who can see past his outer presentation.
Yeah. Or like in families, you know, groups of friends like you were just talking about. Well, in my family, like real life consensus reality, every single one of us in our, like, you know, my parents, my brother and I, our main names are our nicknames. And the reason for that is my brother and I were named after my parents, right? So it would otherwise be very confusing when, you know, or would have been when we were like in grade school and stuff, with just with phone calls. Like, okay, well, which one are you asking for? So there's things like that. But I think in terms of fiction, I mean, you know, and I'm probably beating a dead horse, but like it says a lot about relationship. Like, you know, so in the workplace, you might get a nickname that has nothing to do with your actual name. It might have something to do with the function of your job, right?
Yeah.
Well, and then you have sports nicknames, which are like things like the fridge, you know, like.
Yeah.
I have a character who's in the current story I'm working on, who's supposed to be really, really famous. His name's Oliver, and but the person who's interacting with is not nearly as famous, but she's sort of in awe of him, and he tells her that, oh, you know, call me Ollie. That's what my friends call me, and it makes it kind of like, you know, there's that small group, like you're an insider now kind of thing. And I think that works well sometimes.
Yeah, insider marking, yeah. Well, you know, we thought this was going to be such a short topic, and we're already through our hour. Brits love nicknames, and Australians love nicknames too. I was just stunned by the variety of nicknames in Australia, and there's like the whole family of like Larry, Barry, and oh man, Harry going by Laza, Baza, and Heza. I mean, like, yeah, we could talk about nicknames for an hour, I think, all by itself. Well, you guys, you're awesome. We're going to bring this session to a close, but thank you all for coming. I think this is the biggest crowd I've ever had, and thank you for all of your contributions and your really interesting topics that you helped to bring up. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to take us off the air. And do we have a topic for next week?
I don't know.
Suggestions? Oh, Alexandra, thanks for coming. It's great to have you. Sorry, Glenda?
Segue into place names?
Ooh, that would be great. Place names. Okay, cool.
And geography, I would couple them.
I was about to say that. You and me, Reggie, were thinking about the same thing. Yeah, place names and geography.
Perhaps as a continuation the week after, then do sort of the connection between places and people, as in like clan names or, you know.
Well, I think actually the place names and geography is going to get us a lot into history.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that you know, we've got some things that we can go on. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Next week we're going to do place names and geography, and I hope to see you then.